Chicago, June 1952. When the Illinois Bell Telephone Company installed their first automatic switching system in the Loop District, 247 women reported to work that morning not knowing it would be their last day as telephone operators. The machine that replaced them sat in a climate-controlled room the size of a warehouse, 64,000 relays clicking in mechanical precision, routing calls that human hands had connected for 75 years. But here's what nobody talks about. Those operators weren't just plugging cables into boards. They were performing a cognitive task so complex that it would take another 40 years and the invention of digital computing before machines could truly replicate what they did. What did a 1950s telephone operator understand about human communication that a room full of relays couldn't match? If you want to discover one forgotten profession every week that required skills we've completely lost, hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment telling us what job your grandparents did that doesn't exist anymore. Because the story of work isn't about machines replacing humans. It's about humans doing things so sophisticated we forgot they were sophisticated at all. The telephone operator. You've seen the image. Rows of women seated at switchboards, headsets clamped over perfectly waved hair, hands moving in practiced rhythm across panels of jacks and cords. It looks simple. It looks mechanical. It looks like something a machine could obviously do better. That image is a lie. When Margaret Chen started as a long-distance operator at Illinois Bell in 1948, her training lasted 6 months. Not 6 days, not 6 weeks. 6 months of full-time instruction before she was allowed to handle calls unsupervised. She learned technical protocols, how to route calls through trunk lines, how to test connections for clarity, how to build different call types, how to handle emergency priority calls during disasters. But the technical training was the easy part. The hard part was learning to listen. A long-distance operator in 1950 didn't just connect calls. She interpreted incomplete information, resolved conflicts, made judgment calls about emergencies, translated between languages and accents, navigated social hierarchies, and managed emotional crises, sometimes all in the same call. When someone said, "I need to reach my sister in California," the operator had to determine, which California? Which city? What's the sister's married name versus maiden name? Is this an emergency? Can the caller afford the rate? Is there a cheaper routing option? Should I suggest a night rate call instead? The caller rarely provided complete information. The operator had to extract it through questions that were efficient but not invasive, friendly but not familiar, fast but not rushed. Margaret kept a personal notebook, forbidden by company policy but maintained by nearly every experienced operator. In it, she recorded patterns, common mishearings between similar city names, typical pronunciation variations in immigrant communities, which trunk lines failed most often, and their backup routes, phrases that indicated genuine emergencies versus exaggerated urgency, and how to calm a crying caller enough to get useful information. This wasn't in the manual. This was craft knowledge, accumulated through thousands of interactions, the kind of pattern recognition that machines in 1952 couldn't begin to approach. The cognitive load was staggering. During peak hours, an operator might handle 150 calls per shift. Each call required identifying the caller's location and destination, calculating the rate and time charges, selecting from 40 possible trunkline routes based on current availability, physically connecting 2 or 3 separate circuit segments, monitoring connection quality, timing the call for billing, disconnecting and logging the call, and doing it all while the next caller was already waiting. The average call handling time: 90 seconds. That included everything from "hello, operator" to "thank you for using Illinois Bell." But speed without accuracy meant nothing. A misrouted call could cost the company money. A dropped emergency call could cost a life. Margaret remembered a call from October 1950. A man, voice tight with panic, said, "I need to reach Mercy Hospital, my wife." He didn't say which Mercy Hospital. There were 4 in the Chicago area alone, dozens more in Illinois, hundreds nationally. Margaret asked, "Which city, sir?" He said, "The one with the baby doctor." He didn't know the name. He didn't know the city. His wife had written it down, and he couldn't find the paper. He was calling from a payphone. A baby was coming early. Margaret had 60 seconds to solve this or move to the next caller. She asked, "When did your wife last see the doctor?" "Tuesday. Morning or afternoon?" "Morning, I drove her." "How long was the drive?" "About 40 minutes. "Which direction from your home?" "West, I think." "Through the park." Margaret knew the Chicago area topology, not from maps but from thousands of calls. West through a park from most residential areas meant either Oak Park or Cicero direction. Mercy Hospital in Oak Park had a prominent obstetrics unit. She asked, "Does the hospital name have a saint's name?" He paused. "I don't think so, just Mercy." "Oak Park Mercy, not St. Mary Mercy." She connected him, 3 minutes total. The baby arrived healthy that night. That diagnostic process, that synthesis of incomplete data through contextual questioning and geographic knowledge, represented a form of intelligence that the relay system replacing Margaret couldn't perform. The automatic system could connect a call if you provided an exact number. It couldn't help you find the number. It couldn't interpret. It couldn't care. Stay with me until the end, because the number of skills lost when we automated this job didn't just surprise researchers decades later. It changed how we think about what machines can and cannot replace. The replacement happened in waves. The first automatic exchanges appeared in small towns in the 1920s. You picked up the phone, dialed a number, and relays clicked your call into place. No operator needed. But long-distance calling remained stubbornly human for 30 more years. The complexity of routing calls across state lines, through multiple switching stations, with variable trunk availability and priority handling, seemed to require human judgment. Then, in 1951, Bell Labs demonstrated the first long-distance automatic switching system. By early 1952, installations began in major cities. The system worked through a principle called step-by-step switching. Each dialed digit triggered a mechanical selector to step through contact levels, building the connection incrementally. It was ingenious, it was reliable, and it could handle exactly one thing: a complete, correctly formatted telephone number. The announcement came May 15, 1952. Management gathered the operators in the cafeteria. The district supervisor, a man named Holloway, explained that technological progress required difficult transitions. The company valued their service. They would receive 2 weeks severance, letters of recommendation, and assistance finding new positions. The system would activate June 30th. They had 6 weeks. Margaret remembered the silence in that room. Not shock, exactly. They'd known this was coming. Automatic switching had been in trade journals for years, but knowing something intellectually and facing it directly are different things. One of the older operators, a woman named Doris, who'd worked the board since 1923, raised her hand. "What happens to emergency calls? When someone doesn't know the number?" Holloway smiled in the way managers smile when they have been briefed on a question. "The new system is very intuitive. Users will adapt quickly. For directory assistance, we'll maintain a small team." "How small?" Doris asked. "Approximately 30 positions for the entire district." 247 to 30. The math was clear. Another operator asked about transfer protocols for complex calls. Holloway explained that users would need to hang up and dial again. Someone asked about international calls. Those would still require operators, a different department. Someone asked about callers who couldn't dial, elderly people with tremors, blind people who couldn't see the dial. Holloway said the company would address special needs as they arose. Every answer was a polite version of, "Not your problem anymore." The last 6 weeks were strange, the operators still so. Worked full shifts, handling calls as they had always done, but now training their own replacements, the users. When someone called and asked for a number, operators began responding with, "I'll connect you now, but in the future, you can dial this directly." They taught people how to use area codes, how to wait for the dial tone, how to distinguish a busy signal from a connection failure. They were systematically making themselves obsolete, one call at a time. The final shift ran midnight to 8 a.m., June 30th. Margaret worked it. 73 operators on duty, handling the overnight calls, the emergencies, the long-distance connections from West Coast businesses closing their days. At 7:55 a.m., the board supervisor made an announcement over the internal line. 5 minutes, ladies. It's been an honor. At 8 a.m., they unplugged their headsets, stood, and walked out. Behind them, technicians moved in to disconnect the boards. By noon, the relay room was live, the age of automatic. Switching had begun. The problems started immediately. On July the 2nd, 2 days after activation, a fire broke out in a South Side apartment building. A neighbor tried to call the fire department. She picked up the phone, heard the dial tone, and froze. She'd never dialed a phone in her life. For 30 years, she'd picked up the receiver and said, "Operator, I need the fire department." Now there was just a tone. She didn't know the fire department number. She didn't know how to get it. She hung up and ran to a neighbor's house. The neighbor knew how to dial and made the call. Response time, delayed by 4 minutes. The fire destroyed 6 units before control. No deaths, but 2 hospitalizations for smoke inhalation. That incident repeated in variations across the district. An elderly man having a heart attack. His wife couldn't remember the hospital number and didn't know how to reach directory assistance. A woman in labor who needed an ambulance but only knew her doctor's name, not the hospital number. A businessman who needed to reach his lawyer urgently but only had the office address, not the phone number. Each case represented a failure mode that operators had handled routinely. The automatic system couldn't interpret. It could only execute. Directory assistance helped, but it operated on different principles. The old operators knew neighborhoods, knew businesses, knew patterns. The directory assistance operators, working from printed lists, could only search what was explicitly written. If you said, "I need the pharmacy on Clark Street near the bakery," an experienced operator might know you meant Rexall next to Swedish Bakery at Clark and Foster. A directory assistance operator could only say, "I need a specific business name." The efficiency metrics told one story. Average call completion time dropped from 90 seconds to 45 seconds. System uptime exceeded 99.2%. Cost per call dropped 62%. By every measure Bell executives cared about, the automatic system was superior. But there was another set of numbers nobody tracked officially. Margaret tracked them privately. In her last year as an operator, 1951, she handled an average of 142 calls per shift. Of those, approximately 12 required substantive problem solving, incomplete information, emergency judgment calls, conflict resolution, or special assistance. That's 8.4% of calls. Multiply that across 247 operators, and the loop exchange handled roughly 3 complex calls per day that required human interpretation. After automation, those calls still came in. The system just couldn't handle them. Some callers adapted, learning to have complete information ready. Some gave up and used telegrams or traveled in person. Some simply failed to complete their necessary communication. How many business deals fell through because someone couldn't reach a contact? How many family emergencies escalated because information couldn't flow? Nobody measured it because nobody thought to measure it. But there was one metric that got attention. In August 1952, Bell conducted a customer satisfaction survey. Overall approval of the new system, 74%. That sounds positive until you read the comments. The 26% who disapproved weren't complaining about technical failures. They were mourning the loss of help. I used to be able to ask the operator questions. If I didn't know the number, the operator would find it for me. The operator once talked me through a bad night when I was alone and scared. That last comment appeared in 14 different variations. Operators hadn't just connected calls. They'd been a human voice in the machine, a point of contact that confirmed you weren't alone in the system. The displaced operators scattered. Some found work in the smaller directory assistance department, though at lower pay and longer hours. Some moved to other clerical positions, secretaries, file clerks, typists. Some left the workforce entirely, marriage and homemaking being one of the few socially acceptable transitions. A few, like Margaret, went back to school. She enrolled at the University of Illinois Chicago campus, studying library science. She figured if machines were taking over connection work, she'd focus on information organization, something that still seemed to require human judgment. She was wrong about that too, eventually. But in 1952, she couldn't have known that computers would one day catalog and retrieve information faster than any card system. She only knew that the job she'd spent 4 years mastering had vanished in a single morning, replaced by a machine that could do one thing very well and everything else not at all. The long-distance operator was just the beginning. What happened in that Chicago telephone exchange in June 1952 was happening across dozens of industries simultaneously. The post-war economic boom brought mechanization on a scale never seen before. And with each machine, a job disappeared. Not just disappeared, was forgotten. Within 20 years, most people couldn't remember that these jobs had ever required skill. Consider the knocker-upper. In industrial England and parts of the American Northeast, before reliable alarm clocks, someone had to wake the workers. The knocker-upper walked the streets in pre-dawn darkness, tapping on bedroom windows with a long pole, ensuring factory workers woke for their shifts. It sounds simple. It was anything but. A knocker-upper needed to know every worker's schedule in a neighborhood of 200 to 300 homes, remember which workers did rotating shifts, adjust for seasonal time changes, identify which window belonged to which worker in multifamily buildings, do this in complete darkness with no streetlights, and ensure people actually woke without disturbing neighbors who worked different hours. They maintained mental maps of entire neighborhoods, updated daily with schedule changes. When cheap alarm clocks became reliable in the 1950s, the profession vanished within a decade. We remember it now as a curiosity, a quaint anachronism. We forget it required sophisticated spatial memory and time management performed under conditions most modern workers couldn't handle. Or the ice cutter. Before refrigeration, ice meant winter harvest from frozen lakes. Teams of men would venture onto foot-thick ice, scoring geometric patterns with specialized saws, breaking out massive blocks weighing 300 pounds each and transporting them to insulated warehouses where they'd last through summer. The saw work required extraordinary precision. Cut too deep and you'd lose control. Cut too shallow and blocks wouldn't separate. Cut at wrong angles and entire sections would crack unpredictably. Teams coordinated across acres of ice, communicating through flag signals, working in temperatures that froze metal tools to ungloved skin. The foreman needed to assess ice thickness, snow conditions, temperature trends, and coordinate 40 to 60 men in a ballet of dangerous efficiency. 1. Mistake and men died, falling through ice, crushed by shifting blocks or lost in sudden blizzards. By 1960, commercial refrigeration had eliminated the profession entirely. We think of ice as something machines make in factories. We've forgotten that men once read lakes like texts, predicting where ice would be safe, where it would be pure, where the harvest would be best. The human alarm clock, the ice reader, the telephone operator. Each represented cognitive and physical skills we've completely lost. But perhaps no category of lost jobs better illustrates what we've forgotten than the computers. Before electronic computers, computer was a job title. A computer was a person, usually a woman, who performed mathematical calculations by hand. During World War II, the Army employed thousands of computers to calculate artillery firing tables. Each table required approximately 750 calculations, performed on mechanical adding machines, checked multiple times for accuracy, formatted into reference charts. A single firing table took one computer about 40 hours to complete. The Army needed thousands of tables for different weapons, different elevations, different conditions. At the peak, the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland employed over 200 computers working in shifts, producing the calculations that guided every artillery piece in the European theater. The skill wasn't just arithmetic, it was error detection. When working with hundreds of calculations, mistakes compound. A computer needed to develop intuition for wrong answers, noticing when a number felt incorrect even if the immediate calculation checked out. They cross-referenced results, used estimation to validate ranges, and maintained concentration through hours of repetitive calculation. The best computers could process 30 calculations per hour with 99.8% accuracy. That accuracy wasn't just impressive. It was the difference between shells hitting targets and shells hitting friendly forces. After the war, ENIAC, the first electronic computer, could perform those same calculations in seconds. By 1950, Electronic computers were replacing human computers across government and industry. The women who'd spent years developing mathematical intuition found their skills obsolete overnight. Some transitioned to programming, writing instructions for the electronic machines. Most left technical work entirely, their expertise evaporating into historical footnotes. We remember ENIAC. We've forgotten the 200 women whose combined intelligence it replaced. The pattern repeats across industries. Before mechanical looms, fabric patterns were controlled by drawboys, children who sat atop looms, pulling hundreds of individual threads in precise sequences, called out by the weaver. The drawboy had to memorize complex patterns, maintain perfect timing, coordinate with the weaver's rhythm, and do this for 12 to 14-hour shifts. A skilled drawboy could handle patterns of extraordinary complexity, creating brocades and damasks that required thousands of individual thread selections. When Jacquard invented the punch card loom in 1801, the drawboys vanished. The machine was more precise, more consistent, more tireless, but it couldn't innovate. Drawboys had occasionally improvised, creating unexpected pattern variations that became new designs. The mechanical loom executed patterns perfectly, but created nothing new. We gained efficiency, we lost a form of creative accident. Before refrigerated rail cars, ice bunkers had to be maintained at every rail stop. The ice bunker tender knew exactly how much ice each type of car needed for each distance, monitored ice melt rates by season and weather, coordinated with ice houses for inventory, recognized signs of cargo spoilage before it became total loss, and calculated optimal loading to prevent both melting and freeze damage. When mechanical refrigeration came to trains in the 1950s, the knowledge disappeared. We can still ship food across the country better than ever, but nobody alive can tell you the seasonal melt rate differential for lake ice versus manufactured ice in a ventilated bunker car traveling from Chicago to Atlanta in July. That knowledge simply vanished. The log driver. Before trucks, lumber was floated down rivers. Men rode the logs using pike poles to break up jams, guide logs through rapids, and prevent massive pileups that could dam entire rivers. They read water-like texts, seeing underlying currents, predicting where logs would snag, coordinating with upstream and downstream drivers through instinct and experience. A logjam could kill a dozen men in seconds if broken wrong. The best drivers worked for 30 years without a fatality on their watch. When logging trucks became practical in the 1950s, the profession ended within a decade. We transport lumber more efficiently now. But nobody living knows how to read a spring river's character, predict where 1,000-pound logs will flow, or break a quarter-mile jam without casualties. The film splicer. Before digital editing, every cut in a film was physical. An editor would examine film frames through a magnifying loupe, mark cut points with a grease pencil, physically cut the film with a blade, and splice it back together with tape or cement. The skill wasn't the cutting. It was knowing where to cut. A splice point 2 frames too early would create a jarring jump, 3 frames too late and the rhythm would drag. Expert splicers developed intuition for motion flow, could predict how edits would feel before seeing them played back, and maintained cutting accuracy to within a single frame, approximately 0.04 seconds of screen time. When digital editing replaced film in the 1990s, that haptic knowledge disappeared. Modern editors can try unlimited variations instantly, but they've lost the discipline of commitment, the skill of seeing the right cut point in a single examination, because you only got one piece of film. Stay with me, because the pattern here isn't about nostalgia. It's about a specific type of knowledge that machines can't preserve, and it's about to matter more than you think. What united all these lost jobs wasn't the physical labor. It was the judgment. The pattern recognition developed through thousands of repetitions, the contextual decision-making that adapted general rules to specific situations, the integration of multiple information streams into a single decision. These were cognitive skills that felt like instinct to practitioners, but represented sophisticated information processing. When researchers in the 1980s began studying expert human performance, they found something surprising. The best practitioners in any field, from chess players to firefighters to telephone operators, didn't make decisions through conscious logical analysis. They recognized patterns. They'd seen thousands of situations and developed an intuitive sense of what works in what context. This recognition happened faster than conscious thought, drawing on a mental library of cases that no rule system could encode. This is why automation creates a specific type of knowledge loss. When a job disappears, we don't just lose the ability to perform tasks, we lose the accumulated pattern library built through millions of hours of human experience. A telephone operator's notebook wasn't just personal notes. It was a compressed database of edge cases, exceptions, and contextual solutions that no training manual captured. When 247 operators left Illinois Bell in 1952, they took approximately 50,000 combined hours of pattern recognition expertise with them. That knowledge didn't transfer to the automatic system because the system didn't have a mechanism to capture it. Modern AI researchers call this the knowledge acquisition bottleneck. How do you transfer expert knowledge into a system when the expert can't articulate the knowledge because it exists as recognition, not rules? A log driver couldn't write a manual on reading rivers because the knowledge was a trained perceptual skill, seeing forces and flows through thousands of hours of observation. When the last log drivers retired in the 1960s, that perceptual library was simply lost. This matters now more than ever because we're in the middle of another automation wave. AI systems are replacing jobs we thought required human judgment: radiologists reading X-rays, lawyers reviewing contracts, journalists writing articles, designers creating layouts. The systems are often faster and sometimes more accurate, but they're learning from data, not from the accumulated contextual wisdom of practitioners. When we automate these professions, what pattern libraries are we losing? What contextual knowledge exists in expert practitioners that no training data captures? Consider what happened with telephone operators. The automatic system was more efficient for 90% of calls. But that other 10%, the calls requiring interpretation and judgment, those became harder. Some became impossible. We optimized for the common case and lost the ability to handle the exceptions. 50 years later, we're still dealing with that trade-off. When you call customer service and can't get past the phone tree to reach a human, you're experiencing the same problem Chicagoans faced in July 1952. A system optimized for efficiency that can't handle your specific context. The jobs we've lost weren't lost because humans were inferior. They were lost because humans were expensive and machines were good enough. But good enough means we've lost something at the margins, the edge cases, the situations that don't fit templates. A drawboy might improvise a beautiful accident. A log driver might save lives with an intuitive read of a dangerous jam. A telephone operator might connect the right hospital through contextual questioning. The machines that replace them can't do those things, not because the tasks are impossible, but because the situations are too rare to optimize for. We've made everything more efficient by eliminating the capacity to handle the unusual. Margaret Chen worked as a librarian for 30 years after leaving Illinois Bell. She helped people find information, teaching them to navigate card catalogs and later computer databases. In 1985, a graduate student doing oral history interviews asked her if she missed being an operator. She thought for a long time before answering. "I miss the problem solving," she finally said. Every call was a puzzle, incomplete information, time pressure, stakes that mattered, and you had to figure it out in real time with nothing but your knowledge and judgment. When I got it right, when I connected someone to exactly where they needed to be, there was this little satisfaction. I helped. That specific person in that specific moment needed help, and I provided it. The machines do it faster now, but they can't feel that. And the people can't feel that someone understood their specific problem. It's efficient, but it's lonely. That loneliness, that sense of being processed rather than helped, might be the real cost of the jobs we've lost. Not just the skills and knowledge, but the human contact embedded in those transactions. The telephone operator who talked someone through a crisis. The knocker-upper who knew which workers needed extra taps because they slept deeply. The film splicer who understood a director's vision and found the perfect cut point. These weren't just jobs, they were relationships between expertise and need, human intelligence applied to human problems. We gained efficiency. We lost something harder to quantify, the experience of being understood by someone who knows their craft well enough to solve your specific problem. When the last telephone operators left Illinois Bell in 1952, they took with them not just skills, but a way of working where human judgment was the point, not the bottleneck, where contextual understanding was valued, not optimized away, where exceptions were handled with creativity, not routed to error messages. The story of lost jobs isn't about resistance to progress, it's about recognizing what we traded. We made calls faster, but lost the operator who could find a hospital from the one with the baby doctor. We made fabric production more consistent, but lost the draw boy who might accidentally create something beautiful. We made calculations more precise, but lost the human computers who developed intuition for wrong answers before checking. These weren't just jobs, they were forms of intelligence, ways of knowing, relationships between humans and their work that took decades to develop and disappeared in years. And now, as AI begins replacing knowledge workers at scale, we face the same questions our grandparents faced in the 1950s. What are we losing? What knowledge exists in expert practitioners that data can't capture? What contextual understanding will vanish when the last practitioner retires? Drop a comment below. What job did your grandparents or great-grandparents do that doesn't exist anymore? What skills did they have that nobody needs now? Hit that subscribe button for one forgotten profession every week. And hit the like button if this story changed how you think about automation and work, because the wisest understanding of progress includes mourning what we've lost, even as we celebrate what we've gained.